What up gamers, Aaron here, and we are rapidly approaching the start of the War Within Season 2. March 4th is going to be the day that Mythic Plus and the raids unlock, so that's pretty much the deadline to know exactly what you're going to be spending all of your early season time on. To make it easier, I'm going to be going over every single class today and talking about what might make different picks optimized for your personal goals. Whether it's a comfortable raid logging spec or something that will let you push the leaderboard's highest IO keys, I've got you covered. And if any of this is useful whatsoever, please don't hesitate to check out my channel, where I'll have a ton more 11.1 content coming out soon to help you along your journey. Let's get started. Alright, starting off with the Death Knight. This is a class that has a permanent special spot in my heart after 5 entire tiers maining it. These guys have been taking a lot of wins in the meta over the last few months, getting some time in the high key sun for the first time since Faded Shadowlands. So what have these guys got going for them? Well, as always, Death Knights are fucking beefcakes. Anything that kills a Death Knight will have killed anything else long ago. Even with improper defensive usage, plate armor and the Veteran of the Third War passive ensure that you'll have no problem staying alive. With your defensives nailed down, these guys are able to nullify entire raid mechanics by themselves. Hectic fights, like Kurog Grim Totem in the Vault of the Incarnates, can be countered so strongly by the Death Knight toolkit that you might even find yourself intentionally standing in AoE to generate bonus runic power. While Death Knights don't have a traditional raid buff, there is always at least one Death Grip fight per tier, and they are usually tuned highly enough that a standout Death Knight can take at least one space on any fight. The main downside to playing a Death Knight is going to be their inflexibility. They have very few talent options to change their approach to a fight in any large way. Because of this, Death Knight really shines where they're good, and really suffers where they aren't. As with any class, I recommend you familiarize yourself with every DPS specialization, as being comfortable with both Unholy and Frost doubles your chances of kicking ass on any given fight. Death Knights are also sort of the casters of melee. While a lot of melee specs focus on constant damage or front-loaded burst, Death Knight is all about stacking as much power as you can into burst windows on your cooldowns, followed by a minute or so of low damage where you just tickle the boss till everything's back up. So for that reason, it might be a little awkward to shift your mindset in this way if you've only ever played melee. Have you ever wanted to be unbenchable? Well, Chaos Brand, despite a 40% nerf going into the War Within, is still a ridiculously powerful buff that no raid can go without. If your guild doesn't run a Vengeance Demon Hunter, then there is no chance that their Havoc player isn't in for every single fight. If I had to describe Havoc over the years in a word, it would probably be something close to reliable. While there have been times that they've sucked, such as early Shadowlands, they've almost never been so bad that a truly skilled player can't make them look pretty damn good. Now, Demon Hunter in Mythic Plus is a little sketchier. Certain fights this season, such as the third boss of Operation Floodgate, will test the absolute limits of your mobility mechanics. And while Demon Hunter's defensive abilities are quite powerful, their cooldowns have sometimes led them to struggle in heavy one-shot seasons. The War Within's trend towards mechanics that one-shot over a few seconds rather than in one tick of damage is actually very beneficial to Demon Hunter, as it gives more opportunity for their incredible sustain to shine. Now, if you're looking for fast invites, or wanting to be able to tank keys for guildies, the ability to flex into Vengeance is invaluable, as the spec seems to be very competitive on the PTR, and it has a large ability to influence the dungeon through their various sigils. I would recommend Demon Hunter to a player who wants a mechanically engaging spec, and also has a desire to be a core part of whichever team they find themselves on. But be aware that as a core player, and with an invaluable raid buff, your attendance is going to be critical. Hey dude, what's going on?
Just playing League of Legends, why?
No, dude, that's not the line. You're supposed to say you're getting ready for 11.1. Did you even read the script?
Shoot, my bad.
No, man, it's all good. I'll edit it out. Let's just go to the next one. Okay, what class are you gonna main?
Mark of the Wild.
What? Mark of the Wild? You mean Druid?
Just Mark of the Wild, bro.
Are you trying to tell me you're a feral one trick now? You can just say it, man. I'm not gonna judge you.
No, man. I'm just giving people Mark of the Wild and shit.
Okay, yeah. No, I think I get it. All right, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to maybe play WoW, or we could do some dungeons, or... The unfortunate truth of Druid is how inseparable it is from Mark of the Wild, a raid buff that is practically a universal Vantis rune. Everybody's going to want this buff, but like most raid buffs, they're only going to want as few as they need. If Rest of Druid is the meta healer, you're going to have a much harder time convincing potential groups to invite a second Druid. And that's not to say they're short on utility. Masterful use of the Druid toolkit such as Ursul's Vortex, various Roars, and Innervate are huge for groups. The buff isn't the only quality of the Druid, though, that can be seen as both a positive and negative. As Druids are able to use two-handed maces, they'll be able to take great advantage of the very rare weapon, Best in Slots, which has an on-use to obtain a massive amount of secondary stats, and it doesn't share a cooldown with trinkets. This is going to lead to some incredibly powerful cooldown lineups beyond what the class could ever do without it. Unfortunately, though, this also means that you're going to have to be acquiring this weapon to touch your full potential. It is safe to assume that, like always, Balanced Druid will have a spot in higher keys once enemies live long enough for a ramp. Though, you'll likely be relegated to Feral if you have any intention of doing damage in low-level keys. I would recommend Druid to someone who wants to be able to do it all, but also be aware that you may have to actually do it all. If this video came out at any time before yesterday's patch notes, I would have said that WoW's newest class is actually a really great pick for 11.1. Throughout every patch since their inception, they have been incredibly valuable in either Raid or Mythic Plus. Even at their absolute lowest points, you still required them just off of pure utility. So what about now? Well, augmentation has been tuned quite well on the PTR until now, but early math is showing that the changes received on February 21st are going to definitely hurt their viability now that their damage is a more important part of their tuning. But as with the rest of the classes, you can't make these decisions based solely on tuning, because just like it did today, it can shift at the drop of a hat. So, is it a good main? Well, Evoker has a lot of good things going for it if you're looking to move up to a new level, but not so much if you're just looking to reliably be in for every raid fight and do your weeklies. Nobody can guarantee there will be an Evoker spot on every fight like they could with a Warlock or Demon Hunter. I can't guarantee you're going to be in high demand for Vault Keys if the class is tuned badly, but I can absolutely say without a doubt that if you are raiding at a higher level than you have previously, the more simple rotations of Devastation and Augmentation will really allow you to focus on the fights and on staying alive. I can say with absolute certainty that if you are looking to push keys you've never pushed before, stepping into the Augmentation role and allowing more experienced gamers to pop off can be a great strategy to make the transition way easier. And if Augmentation is tuned well, you can enjoy very favorable queue times with how little DPS players tend to want to be a support. One thing that I will absolutely recommend, however, is that if you play Evoker DPS, don't limit yourself to just being that or a support. If you're a big pumper Devastation main, knowing how to play Augmentation can save you from a tier where the class's damage just isn't there. And if you're an Aug main, don't limit yourself to supporting others. Try and be comfortable stepping up to the plate yourself as well. Hunters have been going through a bit of a golden age in Mythic Plus over the past year. Maybe not touching their highs of late Shadowlands survival, but their reputation as a class made of wet paper has gotten them quite a few buffs to their defensives over the last expansion. Their best spec on the PTR currently just copped a bit of a nerf due to their very strong tier set, and that's quite unfortunate, so it's very possible that you're going to be quite weak until completing your 4-piece. But it's important to remember that spec tuning is a gamble, and as a triple DPS class, Hunter has stacked the deck a bit by having 3 chances at a decent spec. The odds are in your favor that at least one will be good, and if not, you still have a high likelihood of being able to secure at least one spot in any raid comp due to Hunter's mechanical flexibility. Beast Mastery especially is widely regarded as a great mechanic doer over at least a decade, due to their ability to do their entire damage rotation on the move at range. On top of that, It's one of the easiest specs in the game, making it great for the player who wants to show their new guild they can handle the more complex jobs. I'm not kidding, BM is so easy that the only thing easier might be subbing to my YouTube channel for more 11.1 content. But for real, Hunter is and always will be a pretty safe pick for a dedicated main. The one area in which they are sometimes bound to struggle is in the raid buff department. Hunter's mark is not negligible, but it isn't really applicable or practical on every boss fight. For this reason, a bad Hunter tier might have you wanting to sub out a Hunter for a higher DPS class on a boss like Silken Court. But for 95% of all guilds, the roster is not so stacked that you can just set aside a mobile mechanical prodigy just for a slight DPS gain. So I would say that as a first or maybe even second Hunter in any guild, you've got a decent shot at some good playtime and a very solid class. Magician. This one is my main for the patch, and for the last several patches actually, so I'd recommend it, right? Well, maybe. If you've never played Mage, you're probably thinking, man, Mage is Blizzard's favorite. They're always so good. Well, maybe, but it isn't tuning that makes Mages so prevalent. Okay, a lot of it's good tuning, but it's not just tuning. Mage is the exact opposite of Death Knight. While Death Knight is inflexible and has very few options to really fit different encounters, Mage has one or more things for anything you could throw at it. Single target, 2-target cleave, 5-target cleave, burst AoE, pad AoE, burst single target, 5-target burst AoE, priority damage AoE, priority burst AoE. You get the point. Mage has got something for everything. And they've got arcane intellect on top of several stops, great one-shot defense, and several CC options. So for Mage to be out of the question, it's gotta be tuned pretty fucking bad. Sounds awesome, right? Well, if you just want to be a true Archmage that can do everything, you're gonna have to learn everything first. Just this tier alone, I've had to play Sun Fury Arcane, then they changed Burden of Power and we had to relearn Sun Fury Arcane. Then, Controlled Destruction was bugged and we played Sun Fury Fire. Then we played the original Iceland Spellslinger. Then we played Spellslinger Arcane, then Spellslinger Frost, then Frostfire Fire Mage. And finally, Frostfire Frost Mage. And that's just this tier. You might be thinking, okay, I'm fine being just a few % down with my build I'm comfortable with. But that doesn't work. Some of these builds legitimately don't exist anymore, just 4 months later. So does Mage kick ass? Absolutely. And it's looking like it's going to be an incredibly strong performer in the next tier with several items that benefit it greatly. Things like the Mechagon Staff, the Mechagon Bracers, and just incredible tier sets. But Mage is not an easy class, and learning enough to be comfortable with all 3 specs can take a while. So if you want to play a caster with a lot of room to grow as a player and master your class, I think Mage is a great pick. But if you're just looking to try it out for a tier, maybe consider a different class, as just getting the hang of the class itself could take a while. Monk? I actually forgot Monk was a class in this game. Okay, I'm joking around, but seriously, Monk is going into uncharted territory this expansion. Notorious for scaling like absolute shit, they now have secondaries that are meant to take them into the later patches with their heads held high. It's difficult to say exactly where Monk is going to end up, but like Druid, they are very tied to their Mystic Touch buff. If your guild doesn't have a Brewmaster, that's a pretty realistic scenario. But a guild not having a Brewmaster and not having a Mistweaver this expansion, not looking so likely. So there is going to be some pressure for Monk to be tuned competitively to really secure your spot in groups. If you are playing Windwalker next year, try to understand what your spec excels at and really play into it. In tiers where Windwalkers are AoE blenders, blend that shit. Show them what you're good at. Other than that, be open to playing your other specs. It's unlikely anybody is going to ask you to play Brewmaster after the last patch, so hopefully you're open to playing Mistweaver, as it will open up countless doors for you that might not be there otherwise. The Monk class itself has some pretty damn good utility with Ring of Peace, Paralysis, and some rotational heal cutting that's going to be quite helpful in some of these dungeons. So, if the class is even half decent, then a good Monk should have no problem kicking ass at whatever level they're playing at. Red Paladin is the beast mastery hunter of the melee ecosystem. Aside from the pet, or the mechanical tendencies, and your raid leader's not playing one. And this guy just missed your freedom. What is this guy doing? Paladins get a bad reputation from a large portion of the community who look at balance from a top-down perspective, rather than one more aimed at where they're playing themselves. Paladins do bad damage, a tier list maker might say. And they're right in keys where mobs live a long-ass time. But if you're just going for your first 3k IO or your first portals, then Red Paladin is a godly spec. In low enough key levels, they will actually just one-shot packs by getting their damage off before others can even start their engines. And if the Red Paladin's damage themselves is not that high, it's gonna look pretty high relatively when your balanced Druid only gets off 3 dot ticks before the pack gets Ashbringer. And on top of that, they're a very forgiving beginner spec because these things are made to be indestructible. They are incredibly tanky, they bring auras, they have a simple rotation with high burst and fun buttons to press. Everything here is going to be a solid benefit to an early season main. Now if those things aren't selling you on the Ret Paladin already, let's take a look at their tier set. Melee as a whole drew the short straw with DPS tier sets this time around, not Ret Paladin. You are going to be shitting out holy power spenders like you had some bad gas station sushi. And you surely cannot forget about the influence that Paladins as a class have over their parties. Yes, it will cost you damage, but throwing out Word of Glory can come in clutch to save a teammate. Your Freedom can help immobile classes with mechanics, and Bubble can even cheese entire raid mechanics in some tiers. So if your goal isn't getting M+ title, or being an irreplaceable raid spot, give Ret Paladin a try. It is absolutely a great pick for any sort of goal for 95% of all players. Hey man, can I get a PI? Get ready to hear that a lot. Shadow Priest is an interesting one, as history shows that you're going to be getting a lot of dev time, and maybe if you stick with it long enough, you'll even get an unnecessary rework or two. Shadow Priest has historically been a pretty reliable spec for putting out good numbers, and while Blizzard has really tried to clamp down on the utility of certain classes and keys like Rogue, Shadow Priest has seemingly dodged it for all time, despite being arguably more problematic. Mind Soothe is still nuts, and we've now had to watch mind control tech in Necrotic Wake occur in 2 different expansions, completely unchanged. The Mechagon Squirrels were looking to be the most likely candidate this season for mind control abuse, but have been fixed, so there won't be a necessary priest in every Mechagon key. But as a DPS itself, Shadow Priest is going to be pretty desired in Mythic Plus when tuned well, mostly because of their own numbers as well as providing a power infusion. Meta classes that use PI are going to want one in their groups. So unfortunately, your main competition is actually going to be the healers of your own class. One priest is amazing, but like druids, getting a second one is a pretty hard sell. If the meta ends up anywhere besides Discipline Priest, however, I think you'll be eating pretty good. I do think it is important to be open to healing, however, if you want to play a priest, because if you don't want to re-roll, there's a chance you hit a wall in which every key will be wanting the meta healer specifically. As for raid, you'll always have at least one other priest, but that's usually okay because Shadow almost always has some fights in every tier that get to shine. If you play priest, make sure you look for situations where you can use your utility to impress others. Life gripping a teammate out of a bad situation, or dropping PI exactly when it's needed, are good ways to make those people want to play with you more, so always keep an eye out. The biggest complaint you'll hear about this class are going to be the fact that the current playstyles are not very popular, and that Outlaw might bring you closer to arthritis than ever before. Rogues are the mages of melee. 3 specs, all capable of very different damage profiles, and able to exploit all kinds of situations. Outside of any specialization, however, Rogue's base toolkit is something that is going to be constantly desirable. Stops, Shroud, Poisons, it's all very generally useful in any situation outside of raid. Even in raid, you've got your damage reduction poison. This isn't super useful on farm, but for progression, especially at low eye level, this isn't something you can turn away. It's another devotion aura. Shit is goated. It's just on the mob instead of baseline around the player. Unfortunately, the way poisons like this work, you lose a lot of value for being the second rogue. But if you're the only one, then you've got a great shot at being a standout player on your roster. In Mythic Plus, it's super likely you'll have a spec that is pretty damn good. And the way they're good are ways that are always good. Pretty much every one of the specs does good prio damage and at least a decent AoE. Rogue's favorability in keys goes up and down each season, but even when they're bad, they're never so bad that you can't achieve anything you'd want with them. Just like Mage, I would recommend Rogue to anyone who wants a longer term main and a class that they can put a long time into mastering with constant payoff. Shaman are the absolute kings of Season 1. We've all seen clips of them popping off, and it isn't even just enhancement. I feel like enhancement has gotten so much time in the sun over the last few months that people have almost forgotten just how good Elemental has been too. Good news on that front, they're both still absolutely cranking in 11.1. Wind Fury Totem getting replaced with Sky Fury has been good news for Shamans of all specs, so whichever you're planning on focusing here should be just fine. I will say that like Druids, Elemental Shamans can use the very rare weapon, which once again means that you're going to be chasing this thing for potentially quite a while. The area that this class has historically struggled the most is in the survivability department. If it weren't for that, we'd have probably seen double enhancement this season by now, kind of like how double Warlock appeared at the end of Shadowlands. But paired with an augmentation or a prop paladin, basically anything that can both live and help you live, there's a lot of room for these guys to pop off. There's also precedent to some seasons where they can shine without any support, such as Dragonflight Season 1. But it might be safe to assume your high-end viability in Mythic Plus is a bit conditional on both tuning and the support your team can provide, as well as just how good Sky Fury ends up in this raid buff meta. As for raid, enhancement has usually been the preferred Shaman DPS just based off of how they do their damage. But if Elemental ends up being a blaster spec, then much like Shadow Priest, there will be room for you in almost all guilds. Raiding without a Warlock is misery. You've probably never experienced it, as nobody's going to want to do it anyway. You can be certain that as a Warlock, your viability in some game mode is locked down. Health stones? Mandatory. Gateway? Mandatory. Hell, sometimes you need 2 gateways. Summons aren't even usable in combat, but they save your group so much time that they might as well be mandatory too. I don't even have to go further. Is Warlock a good main choice for 11.1? Absolutely they are. And they're looking pretty damn good on the PTR as well. Destruction especially. So if you want a spec that's going to be good, even if they're tuned so shit it's unbelievable, this is going to be your pick. But that's not all. Warlocks are tanks. These guys might not have the sheer number of defensives of something like a Mage, but their baseline durability makes them a very strong pick in early progression where living's not a guarantee. I think that if you pick Warlock for your 11.1 main, you will absolutely not be disappointed. Warrior. Is there any class with more aura than a warrior? I don't think so. 2 fucking weapons. 1 big weapon. 1 weapon and a big fucking shield. Warrior is Chad, no doubt about it. They've received some big buffs on the PTR that were just reined in a bit in yesterday's Rest in Peace augmentation patch, but they're still looking to be in a better spot than they were this tier in terms of pure damage output. One thing that can be said for Warrior is that they are a great cleave class. We saw a lot of that in Nerubar Palace. They might not have been the best at actually killing the boss itself, but when ads need to die, Warriors were invaluable. So if strategies are optimized as well for the next raid as they were for Nerubar Palace, and blendering ads alongside the boss is a possibility, then it's very likely we're going to see another tier friendly to DPS Warriors. The main concern for DPS Warrior mains is going to be your viability in Mythic Plus. It's a really common idea that Warrior is not a good pickup for keys, and that's something I want to kind of push back on a bit. Plenty of Warriors like Crit Cake, Noxiv, and a lot of guys from the CN server have shown that they are absolutely capable of doing very impressive keys. The main problem occurs when people look at Warrior in terms of the pre-existing meta and attempt to slot Warriors in there to poor results. Warrior might not shine in a comp built for fire mages and shadow priests, but when you make compositions where Battle Shout and Warrior's target limits are able to shine, you see that Warrior is actually a very capable DPS. It is undeniable, though, that if you are fighting for your life in the Raider IO trenches and the Pug scene, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle against this sentiment the entire time. So in my opinion, if you want to make Warrior work, go for it. But unless you're willing to build a team of your own, you might have to work a lot harder than others for the exact same results. Alright, so that's every class. Now I want to mention two quick things, and then I'm going to get into my recommendations for you based off of your goals. The first thing is that tuning is a complete gamble. Any hotfix could send any spec straight into God tier, or it could send any of them to the bottom of shitty spec hell. When a new patch comes out, there's going to be tons of patch notes, and so things are going to be changing constantly, and the more important tuning is to you when you're picking your main, the more likely it is you're going to have to reroll. The second thing is that whatever you pick, you have to put in a lot of time with it. You need to do lots of dungeons, lots of raid bosses, try different things, try your other specs. Practice is your best friend. I have seen so many bottom rerolls fail because people do not give them the practice they deserve, and the minute that they encounter something other than hitting a training dummy, they flop over. Okay, so that being said, what classes of the ones we talked about is best for you, based on your personal goals? Well, if you're just looking to play for a while, get your AOTC and KSM knocked out, and then you're probably going to dip, my recommendation would be the safe raid logger specs, which would be Death Knight for melee, or Warlock for ranged. Both of these classes have some really good things going for them. They're both very durable, so people aren't going to be waiting on you if you have to floor pop a couple times while you learn your class. They both have strong burst profiles, which is way more valuable in early raid prog, and they both are able to push further if you decide to play more. And, one more, if they suck, it might not matter because you might not be around long enough to find out. Usually those classes' main risk is that they aren't good in Mythic Plus, but if you're not looking to push super high IO, it's not really going to affect you, so you're kind of immune there. Now, if you're moving up to a higher level, let's say you're looking for your first cutting edge achievement, or you're looking for your first keystone hero, maybe you just want to do some really high keys, I would recommend one of the easier specs. That would be something like Ret Paladin, Beast Mastery Hunter, or Devastation Evoker. All three of these specs are pretty damn good. Beast Mastery especially is looking great on the PTR. Now, what these do is they let you put pretty much all of your brain power into just playing the game. You don't have to think so much about your spec, and that lets you show everybody around you that you're ready to handle the responsibilities and the challenges of this new level you're playing at. When you're in something like a raid trial, you want to show, I can handle mechanics. Even if you don't do your DPS properly, the fact that you live and do your job is going to be miles more important. A second advantage here is that, let's say these specs aren't good at pushing, and you have to re-roll if you want to achieve your goals. Well, now you've spent the earliest part of the season on a butt-easy class. So you've learned the dungeons with no stress on the class, and now you can learn the class with no stress from the dungeons. It's really the perfect season start if you're trying to move up to a new level. Third, and finally, for the people who want to focus on just pushing the highest keys, you want to make that leaderboard your bitch. Well, you have two strategies. The first one is trying to IO springboard yourself off of early progression. This would involve picking something with pedigree from Season 1. We're talking Enhanced Shaman, Frost Death Knight, Assassination Rogue, and basically trying to get into groups fast off of the recognition that, hey, this spec is pretty good. And then, when you knock out your 10s fast, suddenly you're in 11s and 12s with title level or higher gamers, and you can use that to kind of launch yourself forward into their level. This is a good strat, but the later you get there, the worse the players there are going to be, so you have to act quick. The other strat would be to pick something that is doing good on the PTR now, hope it stays that way, and then in 2 weeks, if the meta starts to form and you're looking good, then people will invite you because they say, oh, well, this guy's pretty geared, and he's playing a good spec. This would involve picking something like balanced Druid, any Warlock spec, Beast Mastery Hunter again, perfectly good on the PTR. You could do Enhancement Shaman as well. Or, if you're cool with the learning curve, you could absolutely pick Mage. Mage is probably going to blast. It's just going to probably take the longest time to get used to and get to performing at a high level. But again, if you're picking based off of tuning, you might have to re-roll again. So if this is your plan, and the rug gets swept under you by patch changes, be ready to re-roll fast, and maybe even do it twice if you have to. So those are my recommendations. This is pretty much all of the advice I have for you today. Oh, okay, one more. The new patch is a time of opportunity. There's going to be tons of people looking for people to play with, and a lot of them are going to be a lot better than you. If you get opportunities to play with these people, take it. Don't be afraid of looking like an idiot. Try your best to surround yourself with the best players you can. You might fit in a lot better than you expect. Anyways, that's everything. I've said all I have to say. I've yapped at you for too long. So, I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for your time. If you want, I'd love to hear what you're playing in 11.1 and why you chose it. So, I'll be having a ton more 11.1 content coming out. Feel free to check it out, and I hope to see you soon. Peace. You are going to be shitting out holy power spenders